recognizing the rhyme. That's just the child being able to tell you yes or no, 2 words rhyme. So if you give them 2 words like cat and hat, they can tell you yes they rhyme or no they don't. They're not having to produce it, they're just telling you yes or no they rhyme. And then the final stage is when a child can think of a word that rhymes with a given word. So you ask the child what rhymes with dog, and they can tell you frog. So those are the stages that a child has to progress through to master rhyming. And rhyming is important because research has shown it's a precursor to reading. It also kind of indicates a child's reading readiness too. And it's also important for those language learners. It helps build their oral language skills, and it also teaches them how to manipulate their language and play with their language, which is another important skill. So when you're thinking of a child that you go into the home and it's not a language-enriched home, that child probably will not have been exposed to rhymes. Or if they have, it may be very limited. As compared to the child that is in a rich language home, they probably are already producing rhyming. So you want to be conscientious of that as you're working with rhyming activities. And again, rhyming is abstract. You can't hold it in your hand. It's an abstract concept. In your handout, I included a couple things. I included the stages, and then at the bottom there are 2 really nice resources. The first one has a really extensive list of rhymes I've never even heard of, and they've got them listed alphabetically. So you could share that site with some of your parents, and maybe they'd like to check into some of those rhymes. And some of them actually have the rhyme on the site. When you click on it, they say the rhyme. And the second site has a lot of activities, a little more information about rhyming. It actually has some worksheets too. So some of your parents that are really diligent about wanting to work with their child, they could print out some of those things. Then also, I included 2 resources that list some rhyming picture books. So if you have parents that are good about going to the library, those would be some books they might want to consider getting to read to their child. And then on the second page are more rhyming books, but they're books that have a lot of the nursery rhymes. So these would be resources to share with your parents. So I'd like to share an activity that I created for that rhyming. Oh, sorry?
I had a child last year that I worked with that he could produce rhyme, but he couldn't recognize it.
Okay.
Do you think that's because he memorized the rhymes? Like if
It
I
could
said,
be.
can you tell me something that rhymes with hats? Like he could say cat, bat. But then I would say, okay, does hat and mat rhyme? And he would say no.
Okay.
So he could produce it.
She's asking that she had a child that was able to produce rhymes, so she asked him what rhymed with hat. He could come up with a word, but recognizing the rhyme, he wasn't able to recognize the rhyme. So he almost jumped over a step. So some of it could be that he has learned it in a certain way and he needs to hear it and generate it himself. Hearing it from you, he's not hearing that rhythm, but he's hearing it when he's speaking. That might be the difference. Okay, so that activity, it is from To Market to Market. In your handout, I did print out on, or had Danielle print out on cardstock this activity so you can make it for yourself. So let's say you're working with the child who is more of the beginning learner, who's struggling with a lot of the skills. So what you're going to do is you're going to make this little card set here. You're going to cut those strips out and make cards like this, and you're going to put a piece of Velcro on it. And there are 8. I made 8. I added an extra rhyme. You have 7, but I like to work in even numbers, so I added an extra one. So anyways, but you're going to make it like this, and then you're going to cut the little pictures apart, and they'll have the matching Velcro on the back. Okay, did you find that in your handout, everybody? So the way I would present it to the child who doesn't know much about rhyming, again, I'm not going to start with the word rhyming because that has no meaning to them. So I'm going to start it with, we're going to do an activity with some pictures. So I would pull out these little pictures, and I'd go through and have the child name each one and lay them in front of the child. So all those little pictures are laid in front of the child. And then I'm going to use these rhyming pairs to introduce the activity. So I'm going to say to the child, I'm going to read something to you. I want you to listen and see if you can find which picture goes on this card with the cat. So I'm going to say, look at the cat, he's wearing a hat. Look at the cat, he's wearing a, and hopefully the child can add that word and finish that sentence and put the picture right on there. Then I might say, cat, hat. They sound almost the same. They rhyme. And then I would continue on until the child gets all of the pictures. So you're bombarding them with some rhyming and hearing rhyme, but you're not expecting them to recognize the rhyme or produce the rhyme. And then when you're finished with this activity and all the pictures are on here, I would hand it to the learning advocate and have the learning advocate have the child read each pair of words. And as the child says cat, hat, then the child can pull it off and put it back in your packet. That way it's ready for your next student, and it also gives the child another practice with rhyming. Excuse me. Now for the child that's more advanced and is already doing some rhyming and playing with words and matching sounds to words and letters, I would not lay out those little pictures. The only thing I would pull out of my container would be this. And so I'm going to say to the child, we're going to do a rhyming activity. And you have to think of a word that rhymes with cat to finish my rhyme. So I would say to the child, look at the cat, he's wearing a, and hopefully the child would come up with the word hat, then you can pull it out and stick it on and continue that way. They have to finish the rhyme, so they're producing the rhyme. Then when you're finished with this activity, again, I would hand it to the learning advocate, have the child read those two words, or name the two pictures, and then add a third word that rhymes. So you're challenging them a little bit more. So they're going to say cat, hat, what's another object that rhymes with those two, or another word? And then they can pull it off and put it back in their container too. So you're challenging them a little bit more. You're asking them to produce the rhyme. So that'd be two ways to do that activity. Any questions? Okay. I'd like to continue on now and talk about the other part of communication, and it's speech. And as Linda had mentioned earlier, a 4-year-old's speech is 90% intelligible. That means you can understand 90% of what they say. And that's not just with you, it's across environments and with varying people. And it could also be just in their conversation, not related to something in front of you, because a lot of times you can understand the child a little bit better when you know what they're talking about. Speech includes articulation, as I'd mentioned before, the production of speech sounds, fluency, how your speech sounds, is there a rhythm to it, do you stutter, the rate of speech, do you speak too fast, too slow, and voice quality. If you think of how people sound when they have a cold, extreme cold, they're denasal. None of the air goes up through their nose, so all the nasal sounds, M, N, and ing, don't come through the nose. So they're denasal. A child that has their tonsils removed, a lot of times will sound nasal, and that nasality could last up to 6 months because the throat is having to compensate for the tonsils being removed. Someone who overuses their voice can sound harsh. I'm working with a little boy right now who loses phonation as he's expressing himself. When he gets to the end of his sentence, his voice is a whisper. He hasn't learned good breath control, and he's also done some overuse of his voice. Both Linda and I do not like to do voice therapy. It's not fun. But anyways, all of those areas are included in speech.
Hi.
Hi.
What's your name?
Jordan.
Hi, Jordan.
Batman beat up Joker.
Batman beat up Joker. Okay, do you want to sit and answer some questions?
Yeah.
Okay. How old are you?
4.
4. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Brother.
You have a brother?
No sister.
No sister.
I think sister, no.
You don't want a sister? Okay. So how many brothers do you have?
1,
1?
2.
Just one? What's his name?
Jaden.
Jaden. Is he older or younger than you?
Not know me.
Younger than you? How old is Jaden?
Run.
1. Do you go to school?
Yeah.
Every day? Wow. Does Jaden go to school? No. So what does Jaden do all day?
Stay home, mommy.
He stays home with mommy?
Yeah.
What does mommy do?
Mommy just they updated.
She helps and cleans up Jaden?
Uh,
Now what does daddy do?
Stay home meal.
Daddy stays home with you?
No, I just got you.
You go to school.
Daddy is stay home. Daddy stay home feel sick.
Oh,
And
when
Daddy
he's
got new
sick?
hat. These 2 new hats.
Okay, daddy got a hat. But does daddy stay home or does he work?
Him book and stay home.
He works and then on the weekend he stays home?
Yeah. No, I stay home all time go.
Oh, all the time. Well, you have half a day in school.
Yeah, that is summer day now, not last time.
Not last time. Okay, now, do you know your ABCs?
A B C D E F G H I K K N O P Q R S T.
So how do you help a child that has issues with their speech? And I'm talking about articulation. You want to repeat with the correct word. So if they say they want the towel, you say, oh, you want the cow. Repeat the word back and emphasize the sound that they said in error. Or you could repeat with the error production and the correct production with a choice. So if they'd say, I want the towel, you would say, oh, do you want a towel or a cow? So you're giving them both words and you're beginning to help them discriminate between sounds, but you're not asking for the production. If they still say towel, just accept it and go on, but you've given them the model of how it should sound. For the child that is extreme, how many of you have children that you can hardly understand anything they say? Quite a few of you. For that child, you might want to think about the types of questions you're asking. You might want to consider using more yes-no type questions or those closed-ended questions because you know what the response should be. But if you're using an open-ended question, that child could talk a whole paragraph and you would have no idea if they answered your question appropriately. So that's just something to think about. A couple years ago, there was a little boy that used a lot of jargon, which is non-speech verbalizations. He just jibber-jabbered. And every once in a while, I could pick out a word that he was saying correctly. He showed frustration when people didn't understand him. But I learned that if I pulled out that one word I could understand and said it back to him, he didn't show as much frustration. So he would jibber-jabber along and I'd hear the word dog. So then I would just say to him, dog? And he'd go, yeah. And I'd go, oh, great. And then we'd move on. So I blame my not understanding on myself a lot. And maybe you've already done this, where they tell you something and you cannot make head nor tails of what they're saying. And I think I observed Sue doing, or yeah, Sue, you did that, I think, with a lesson. Or Brenda. I mean, yeah, you were saying about that. I just said, you know, you can say, I have a cold in my ears. I am really having trouble understanding you. Can you save that story when I come back, when my ears maybe are working better? And most of the time they won't remember. Or you could also say, my ears are just not working well today. How about if we talk about that on another day? Also, ask the speech therapist what sounds she is working on and try to emphasize those sounds in your lesson. I have a little girl right now that just mastered the F sound. And I talked to Sue in Sandy Valley about trying to emphasize that when she's the child. So every time she's counting, she produces the F in 4 and 5. And that helps me as a speech therapist because it's teaching the child to use those new sounds with other people. It helps with a carryover, which means they're using the sound, the corrected sound, in a lot of variety of situations. And the last thing you want to think about is to be careful of your rate. If you talk faster, they're going to talk faster, and there's more chance of them producing words incorrectly. So those are some ideas of how to support speech. Now I'd like to talk about stuttering a little bit. How many of you have children that stutter? A couple of people? Okay. Just some interesting facts. 1% of the world's population stutters. It's more common among boys. 4 times as many adult males stutter as females. It occurs most often, it appears most often between the ages of 1.5 and 5. As many as 80% of the preschoolers who stutter do develop out of it. And almost 5% of all children are likely to be disfluent at some point in their development. If you go back to the one that says as many as 80% of preschoolers who stutter develop out of it, you might think, well, then why would you do speech therapy? Well, the reason is you can't predict what's going to happen. So if I have 3 children in front of me and all 3 of them are stuttering very badly, I'm going to want to work with them because one of them might be that child that does not develop out of it. So you do want to address it at a younger age. And as you know, the earlier intervention, the better. Typical disfluencies. What's typical? For a 4.5-year-old, it's okay if they repeat words or phrases a few times. If they use filler words like or as they're talking, like that's okay. And they don't show any tension or frustration when they're talking. They just stutter and keep going on with their conversation. They don't seem to have any issue with their talking. But what's not typical is the child that repeats syllables and sounds more than 2 or 3 times. I've had children, I could count up to 8 to 10 repetitions of a syllable of a word. So like with the words purple, they keep repeating purr, 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 purr to get through it. Or they repeat the beginning sound of a word, apple. That's not typical. Prolonging sounds, they stretch out the sound in the word. So if the word is sheep, they're going sheep. Or they block, and that's where a child tries to say something, but it looks like they can't get that word past their lips. Their lips are kind of pursed. Tension, you see some tension in the neck. You can see them almost straining, and you see some tension in their face. They might also have other behaviors which are called coping behaviors. I'd like to give you an example of many hundreds of years ago when I was in college. I had a professor who spoke in a very large group. It was a large setting. I think there were probably like 80 of us in that class. And as he was talking, he would slap the chalkboard. We had chalkboards, not whiteboards. He would slap the chalkboard, or he would slap the table, or as he walked around, he might slap a table in front of someone. And all of us figured he did it to keep us awake because it was history of the world, and how interesting could that be? Anyways, he did a lot of hitting. And we just thought it was really bizarre, but we loved the professor. He was actually very entertaining. But he did that frequently. And we also thought maybe it was a way of keeping us awake, too. So, but what I found interesting was 2 years later, I was asked to help run an adult stuttering clinic. And that professor was part of that clinic. And here, that was his coping mechanism. When he felt he was going to stutter, he would hit something, and it would get him through that moment. And when he came to the clinic and we didn't allow him to hit anything, he could hardly get a single word out. Another interesting story, are you familiar with Annie Glenn? She's the wife, was the wife of John Glenn, the astronaut. Her speech was judged to be 85% unintelligible. So that meant only 15% of the time could people understand her because she stuttered so severely. She couldn't even read a bedtime story to her children. But she had a success story. She went to a clinic in Virginia. She was there for 3 weeks, and she was not allowed to have any contact with her family, her friends, and she worked on her speech for 11 hours a day. After that 3 weeks, she was allowed to call her husband, and when her husband heard her talk, he burst into tears. But the first line to her husband was, "John, there's been something I've been wanting to tell you for a long time. Pick up your socks." But she is a spokesperson for the National Stuttering Organization, and you can win the Annie Award. James Earl Jones, he's a stutterer, and he earned the first Annie Award. Another story, I had a child, and this one was kind of heartbreaking. He came in for kindergarten screening. He was 5 years old. And he came in for my kindergarten screening, and he sat down at the table, and he looked at me, and he said, "Are you the lady that's going to help me talk better?" But he took 5 minutes to get that out. That's how much stuttering he was doing. I'm sitting there just giving him my attention, but I wanted to cry. It was so hard for him. He had all kinds of tension. He was throwing his head back. He was twitching. His eyes were blinking really fast. His hands were doing all kinds of motion. He was a severe stutterer. And he had a background in stuttering. His dad stuttered. His grandfather stuttered. So he had a lot of that hereditary issue that can sometimes appear with stuttering. But he's a success story. He had speech therapy. I worked with him through high school. And by the time he graduated, he only had minutes, like little, I want to say, blips in his speech. And like 2 years after he graduated, he sent me a video of himself. He pursued communication. That's it. That's his major. And he sent me a video of himself doing a conversation. It was awesome to see. So, Linda, can we play that video? I'm not sure how to do that. This is an example of a child that you would definitely want to refer with some stuttering issues. And this child is only trying to say one question.
Have you ever had a dream that you want him to do you so much you could do anything?
You want to slow your own rate of speaking as you interact with a child. There's been a lot of research with parents that have children that stutter. If you talk to the parent and you interview them, and you can kind of start to pick up the mom's rate of speech or the caregiver's rate of speech. And if you're in the home, you can kind of see what the house is like. Is there an uproar? Is there constant motion and all kinds of things going on? Does that child have a lot of older siblings that tend to talk a lot? That causes a lot of anxiety for that child that's already having some issues with their speech. And they'll want to talk faster to get their information out or to keep up with everybody, and that puts more pressure on their system. So when you're working with that child, you want to slow yourself down. You also want to make sure you use pauses in your speech. You know, don't go from one sentence to the next. You know, give a nice pause. The National Stuttering Organization of America feels that Mr. Rogers, remember the TV show? His rate of speech is a good rate to model when working with a child with stuttering. I cannot do his rate. It's a little too slow for me, but that's something good to think about. When I was at that stuttering clinic, we also had a clinic for little ones that stuttered. And we would have the parent come into the clinic room, and there would be toys, and we'd ask the parent to go ahead and play with the child. And we would video the child interacting with the parent. And we'd see all this stuttering going on. Well, then we'd talk with the parent, and we worked with the parent on getting her how to play with the child and use that slower speech. That's all it took, and a lot of the children just stopped the stuttering. It went away because the mom learned how to slow herself down, or the main caregiver. You want to make sure you do not interrupt that child or finish his speech for him. Let him get through that stuttering moment. If you interrupt him, you're going to put more pressure that can increase the stuttering. If you finish his speech, think how frustrating that is. He didn't get a chance to share with you what he wanted to say. And you don't want to tell the child how to talk. You don't want to say, slow down, take it easy. But you could praise a time when they speak really well. So they tell you something and it sounds beautiful. Then I would say, I really like the way you told me that story. I wouldn't say I like the way you said it. Don't refer to the speech. Just talk about, praise what he shared with you. Pacing boards. I don't know, are any of you familiar with pacing boards? Nobody? You guys are. Telling on you. Pacing boards are a strategy that speech therapists use to treat a variety of speech issues. And again, they're in your handout, so you have a copy of these. We could use them to increase a child's awareness of speech rate. A lot of times, children's speech issue isn't a result of them having a hard time producing the sounds. It's the fact that they talk so fast, they start dropping sounds. And I worked with a child last year who had beautiful articulation. He produced all his speech sounds perfectly. But when I talked with him, you could only understand about half of what he said because he spoke extremely fast. excuse me again. So with the pacing board, what I did with him is I put this in front of him, and I would have him point to one of the pictures and follow himself along with what he's saying, because you can't point as fast as a fast talker can talk. So as he was sharing information, I like my new car. He would point out, it would slow him down. It made him a little bit more aware of his own speech and how he was talking so fast. If you get on, I think if you put in pacing boards on YouTube, there is a very interesting clip, and I should have attached it, but it's a young man who is probably, I'd say, maybe high school, beginning college. His speech is so unintelligible, and the speech therapist was having him read sentences, and even reading his speech was unintelligible. But the minute he read the sentences and pointed to the pacing, I think he used like little blocks, his speech was beautiful. You could understand everything he said. Speech therapists might also use these to increase sentence length. I'm working with a 2.5-year-old right now who really is only producing one-word utterances, and he should be producing 2 and 3. So if he says something he wants, he might say, "me red," because he wants the red toy or whatever. And I would use this and say, "I want red." I'm pushing a 3-word phrase, and he's beginning to use this, and it's really neat to see. I don't have to even show him. He right away gets it, and he points to it. So he can tell me what he needs. And when he says, "me red," I'm going to say, "me red? Oh, you mean I want red." And then he mimics me, and it helps expand his utterances. We might also use these to teach a child the number of syllables in a word. I have a lot of children that drop syllables in words. They just kind of slide through the words. So like if the word is elephant, they say elephant. They might say laybug. They're not really hearing those individual syllables. So I have a lot of pictures with multi-syllable words on them, and I have them point, motorcycle. So they learn that that word has all those different parts to it, and it helps them articulate a little more clearly. You can also use these for sound awareness. I have some children that drop the ending sounds. They have what's called final consonant deletion, and you can use this to point out, like the word is dog, and they might just say daw, so it's d-og. So they learn, and I would probably only have the 3 pictures, but it's teaching them that that word has more than just the 2 sounds. As a parent partner, I could see you using these with some of the activities where you're having the child talk and you want them to slow a little bit. I could see that this would be beneficial, but I would really recommend consulting with the speech therapist on your team as to how she thinks you would use it with that child. And one other point with these, if you decide to use it to help that child that talks too fast, don't use it also for multi-syllable words. Use it in one way with each child. Don't use it in more than one way. The next page are some general suggestions, and a lot of them are things you already know, and we just thought it would be good to review them real quickly. Learning environment. Make sure you have that TV off and it's quiet without distractions. I have a parent right now, she always forgets to not run the dishwasher. I come early in the morning, she cleans up the breakfast dishes and puts them in the dishwasher, and she starts the dishwasher. So every time I come, she says, "Oh, I forgot, let me turn it off." So, but I didn't say anything to her at first until I bonded with her. You also want to use good lighting, especially for you, because you're having them write letters and look at words in books. You want good lighting. As speech therapists, we have found it's best to either sit across or diagonal from a child. If you have a child that happens to have some fluid in their ears, their hearing might not be exactly where it needs to be that day, and you're trying to teach them what sound B makes, they're going to miss some of the visual cues that they would see if they were sitting across from you or diagonal. If you have a child that's hearing impaired, they definitely need to see your face because they're going to be reading and understanding you. They're going to read your face and your expressions, and they might also be doing a little bit of lip reading too. Feedback. Feedback is so important, and we as speech therapists, we've had to even take some classes. I don't know if you remember, I took a class on it. I observed a few years ago, I observed a parent partner who really didn't give feedback to the child. And if she did, it was always good job. You want to think about your feedback being more specific to the task that the child just completed. So if you had them write their name, you'd want to say, I really like the way you wrote your name. And then you could take it a step further and say, let's go back to when we first started. Look how you made the letter B here, and look how you're making it now. That is wonderful. You are doing great writing your name. You also want to acknowledge those mistakes. And I know sometimes that's hard, but the child needs to know that that's not quite what you want. But they did make an effort, so I always praise the fact that they tried. I have a little girl that I'm working on the K sound, and it's a struggle for her to get that sound. She cannot just go k. We're shaping it from a cough. We're going on. She has to do all kinds of contortions to try and get that sound. And it's hard, and whenever I bring out the card that has the K on it, right away I can see her face kind of like, oh no, we're doing that sound again. But I always tell her, we're going to try it, and I'll tell her, I love the way you tried the K sound, and then I let it go. At least I acknowledge the fact that she did it, and I said I'm praising the trying, not the actual production. Structure. A lot of you are so wonderful in the structure of your lessons. When I drive from home to home, in my head I'm kind of running through the goals of what I'm going to be doing that day and the order that I'm presenting. You yourself know if you go to a presentation, I hope ours wasn't like that, if the speaker is not organized, you're going to have trouble following along. Your attention's going to stray. That speaker might take a while to get to the next topic. You want to have yourself, in your mind, you want that lesson plan strong in your head. I teach dogs agility. And I always tell the people that are working with their dogs, you want to be one step ahead of your dog. You want to have in your head what your goal is, and you want it to be firm. And it's amazing the difference in their handling skills when they have that. And so with children, you want to have in your head what you're planning to do and have it organized. Power of 5. Maybe some of you are already doing it. Again, I need to drink water, excuse me. A lot of times when I do a task that a child doesn't like, I'll say, well, let's try it 5 times, and I'll hold up my hand. We're going to try it 5 times. Let's see if you can make all 5 of my fingers pop up. So I go like this, and I'll say, all right, let's try your sound. Like that girl with the K, if she knows she only has to try it 5 times, she's with me. She knows where the end is. If you think of yourself in a fitness class and they're making you do all those sit-ups, I hate sit-ups. So they're making you do all those sit-ups and you're thinking, when are we going to be done with these? And you think, maybe I am going to stop here. But the fitness instructor says, we're only going to do 3 more. You think, I can stick with it. I can get those 3 more in. It's the same kind of idea with a child. It's like, oh, I only have to do it that many times. And having that visual support there of that hand, that just helps a little bit too. And I found doing that, a lot of times the kids think it's such a game that they want to go further and they want my other hand up. So it's a little more engaging for the child. And then recapping the lesson. I always try when I'm working with a child to talk with the child at the close of our lesson. Can you remember 3 things we did? By you recapping your lesson, talking to the child at the end, saying, okay, can you tell me 3 things? And again, you can put your hand up. 3 things we did. You are practicing the expressive language that Linda mentioned. You can practice past tense, which a lot of those 4-year-olds do not have. And you're practicing it so later, if the child's learning advocate is grandma, then later when mom comes home, and mom says to the child, what did you do during your Spark lesson? They might remember those 3 things that you recapped, and they could share with their mom what they did. So, you know, I wrote my name. There's that irregular past tense. We read a book. We drew a picture. So that helps. It also helps kind of close your lesson. It reviews everything for the child. The next thing I'd like to talk about are hands-on things and how important those are. And Linda kind of talked about that with the bunny cakes. So I just want to share a couple of ideas with you, and some of the things are in your handout, and some of them you might get as prizes today. So I want to talk about the book Barnyard Banter. This is a fun book, and you hear the word goose. And when I know I've seen some parent partners share this book with the child, you talk about the word banter and what it means. So to make this book a little more meaningful for the child, and you're engaging in some play with the child, what you're going to do is you're going to tell the child that they're going to be the goose, and they're going to banter. So they're going to be talking in a fun way, but they're going to have to listen for the word goose. And every time they hear you say the word goose, they're going to say honk, honk. I've done that kind of an activity with books. I used to go into kindergarten and first grade classrooms and do stories with some of the children, and I'd always come up with some way to get the child engaged in the story. By having them do an activity when the book is presented, they were much more attentive, that it had more meaning for them, and it was amazing how much easier they were able to answer comprehension questions just because they attended a little bit more. So, word of warning though, you do want to practice that before, so you might just say dog, cow, horse, goose, and make sure they get the concept of it, and say, all right, so you're the goose, you're going to banter in this story. Another thing you can do is actually bring a goose, and I have to confess, this is a dog toy. I couldn't find a goose that made noise. So anyways, you could tell the child that they're going to be the goose. Now they've got a hands-on thing, and they're actually the goose because they've got it. And they need to make the goose talk, so every time you hear the word goose, they're going to squeak it. They're going to squeak it twice. So that's just another fun way to get the child engaged in the story. And then at the end of the story, if you do have a hands-on, you can talk about this. The goose has a beak. Oh, look, he's got 2 feet. Did the other animals have 2 feet? So you can expand it a little bit. So that just makes that story a little more fun. I have to confess, I think To Market is my favorite of all the books that you use. As a speech therapist, all the language that's present in this book is wonderful. I just think this is a cool book. But anyways, there are a lot of ways you could use this book and use hands-on materials. And this book also naturally lends to sequencing. And sequencing is that ability for a child to put things in order. What happened first, what happened next, what happened last. So this story here, you could practice that skill of sequencing. So I've got 3 different ways you could present it. So you would do your wonderful introduction like you always do, and you talk about what a market is. And then you might want to say to the child, what do they put grandma's groceries in when she's going home, and they put it in a grocery bag. So you're going to have a grocery bag and put that in front of the child. And then you're going to have all these little manipulatives, and as they hear the story, they can buy the animal. So they're going to be putting it in the grocery bag. So you'll have, these things in front of the child, and they have to find the one that the lady just bought and stick it in the grocery bag. If you don't have access to the animals, in your handout, there are pictures of all the animals that are in the story, and you can have the child just put the pictures of the animals in the story. But again, you want to go through and name them all before you do the activity. So you say, to market, to buy a fat pig, so the child picks up the pig and puts it in the grocery bag. And then at the end of the story, you could dump the pictures out and talk about them a little bit to expand their language. Another way to do that story, which I really like doing this, is using a story stick. And those pictures, I think, are in your folder, in your handout too. A story stick is a paint stick with Velcro added to it. And you use this as you're telling the story. Again, you're going to have the pictures cut out and put in front of the child. And as you tell the story, the child can stick the picture onto the story stick. And what's nice about using a story stick is when you're done, you can review the story and all the pictures are right there. And you can talk about what was first. What did she buy first? It was the pig. What happened at the end of the story? What was last? And you have the bowl of soup. And you could also have the child tell you everything the lady did in the story. So you're practicing that expressive language skill, and you're practicing using that pronoun she. because so many of the children say her for she, and you're practicing past tense. So the child would say, well, she bought a pig, she bought a goose, she bought a chicken. So you can go right down the story stick. So that's another way. I think we also included pictures for bunny cakes too for the story stick. Another thing I wanted to share with you, I think a lot of you already have these wipe-on boards. Are yours magnetic? Okay. I love the magnetic ones because I love to use magnets. So a couple years ago, there was a little girl who had no speech. The only thing she could do was make a guttural noise. And at that point, she had not been fitted with an augmentative device, a device to help her to talk. So the parent partner was having a lot of frustration working with the child because that child couldn't share the information she knew. And actually, the child's receptive, her understanding, was age appropriate, but she had no way of communicating that. So we made a lot of little boards for the child to use. So we would just put it on the whiteboard, and as the parent partner was telling the story, a color of his own, the child could point to the colors. If the parent partner asked her what color was the elephant, she could point to gray. So she was able to communicate. The parent partner could ask her, what's your favorite color? And she could tell her. So this was a simple way of giving the child a means of communication. With some of your other children that are still struggling with colors, you might want to put this board in front of them, and as you're reading the story, you can just have the child point to the colors as they hear them. Again, that's keeping them engaged with the story. Another way to use it would be, you know those little glass stones you put in a vase? You could have some of those, and as the child hears the color, they could put a glass stone on and see how many colors they hear in the story, because then you can count too. You can throw in that extra counting. The one thing I do want to say, I did not put a square for white because I needed an even number for the square, but you can always point to that little area there. So, another thing, the emotions chart that you use for a color of his own. Sometimes this is a little overwhelming for some kids, and some kids don't have a lot of interest, but if you bring out a pointer stick, now you got them. So, and my kids love to use this. And this is good for eye-hand coordination too. So when you're asking about, you know, who do you think feels worried? And then they can point. So you're just kind of using it. And this was $1 at the dollar store. So, but that's an extra way to add some engagement with that activity. For a child who cannot handle all of those pictures and really doesn't understand feelings, because again, that's abstract, you might not want to put all those pictures up. You might just want to have the pictures cut apart, and again, I put magnets on them, and just put 2 pictures up and just talk about 2 at a time. And again, the child can point with the pointer stick if they want, but reducing the number of choices helps for that child who's struggling a little bit. And then in your handout, there is a little whistle pattern that you can use for the whistle for Willie. This is not the size that you make, but I did this just for demonstration. So when you're doing that story and the children can't whistle, this is kind of a fun thing to do so the children can whistle at the end of the story. So you take a rectangular piece of paper, and I think I have the dimensions on the handout. You fold it in half, and then you fold the ends up to the middle, like that. And the cool thing about this is if you look at that, it makes a W. So you can talk about, look, we made a W out of paper. Then you cut a notch in the paper like that. And the way this works is you put it between your 2 fingers like that, and you hold it up to your mouth, and you blow into that space right there, and it does make a whistle. A really irritating whistle, but it does make a whistle sound. So that might be something fun to add at the end of the story. I knew you were going to ask that. No, I refused. That's why I made it so big. You know, have you ever done that where you put the blade of grass between your fingers? It's kind of that noise. So, but this is kind of a fun thing to add to that lesson. So those are just a few of the hands-on activities. Do you have any questions about any of those things? Good. All right. So how are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing good. All right, so the next activity is up to you. Wait a minute, I should show the last slide. So Just in conclusion, who to refer? If you're not sure, refer and talk about that child at your RST meeting.